I just want to thank everybody for being here. Uh, it's always a special thing when I get to speak here, and I really enjoy your feedback. And so we'll start with a story. Mu-nan, the man who never turned back. And this was written by Stephen Damon. I guess it was maybe it is an old story, so I guess he put it on the web, but anyway, got it from him. And I know it's an old story because I've heard it from other sources. So, okay. Gudo was the emperor's teacher of his time. Nevertheless, he used to travel alone as a wandering mendicant. Once, when he was on his way to Edo, the cultural and political center of the shogun, he approached a little village called Takinaka. It was evening and heavy rain was falling. Gudo was thoroughly wet. His straw sandals were in pieces. At the farmhouse near the village, he noticed 4 or 5 pairs of sandals in the window and decided to buy some dry ones. The woman who offered him the sandals, seeing how wet he was, invited him in to remain for the night at her home. Gudo accepted, thanking her. He entered and recited a sutra before the family shrine, and then was introduced to the woman's mother and her children. Observing that the entire family was depressed, Gudo asked what was wrong. My husband is a gambler and a drunkard, the housewife told him. When he happens to win, he drinks and becomes abusive. And when he loses, he borrows money from others. Sometimes he becomes so thoroughly drunk, he does not even come home at all. What can I do? I will help him, said Gudo. Here's some money. Give me a gallon of fine wine and something good to eat, and then you may retire. I will meditate before the shrine. When the man of the house returned about midnight, quite drunk, he bellowed, Hey, wife, I am home. Have you something for me to eat? I have something for you, said Gudo. I happened to get caught in the rain, and your wife was kind enough to ask me to remain here for the night. In return, I have bought some wine and fish, so you may have some of that. The man was delighted. He drank the wine at once and laid himself down on the floor. Gudo sat in meditation beside him. In the morning, when the husband awoke, he had forgotten about the previous night. Who are you? Where do you come from? He asked Gudo, who was still meditating. I'm Gudo of Kyoto, and I am going on to Edo, he replied, the Zen master. The man was utterly ashamed. He apologized profusely to the teacher of his emperor. Gudo smiled. Everything in this life is impermanent, he explained. Life is very brief. If you keep on gambling and drinking, you will have no time left to accomplish anything. And you will cause your family to suffer too. The perception of the husband awoke as if from a dream. You are right, he declared. How can I ever repay you for such a wonderful teaching? Let me see you off and carry your things a little way, if you wish, said Gudo. The two started out, and after they had gone 3 miles, Gudo told him to return. Just another mile, 5 miles, he begged Gudo. They continued on. You may return now, suggested Gudo later. Another 10 miles, please. Return now, said Gudo, when the 10 miles had been passed. I'm going to follow you all the rest of my life, declared the man. Modern Zen teachers in Japan spring from the lineage of the famous master who was the successor of Gudo. His name is Mu-nan, the man who never turned back. So this is a very interesting story to me. I was fishing around for something that would catch me to talk about, and this caught me. And it's because I feel very much like my life has been lived like the drunk. Whenever I'm winning, I drink more. Whenever I'm having a great time, I have more. Whenever something's going, and then sometimes I lose, which seemed like most of the time, losing was a common thing. So I was always down in the dumps and always grumbling around and borrowing and this and borrowing that, and not really taking care of people around me or myself that well. And not that I was a drunk alcoholic, but I've had my fair share of things with drugs and drinking, and but even I would conduct many other things in my life once I even stopped doing that. As the drunk, I would pursue very difficult professions and beat myself up trying to accomplish something with them. It's kind of a Hollywood thing. There's never enough to win. There's always it's an infinite bottom of bipolar activities you could take part in, which is kind of what drinking and being a drunk is, and that. So it carries over. It's just the manner of doing things. And I feel like I have been like this for so long. I even, before I even recognized it, I started saying, you know, trying to win in Hollywood is like being a gambler. It's like being an alcoholic. You can't stop until you hit bottom. And there's no really any winning in sight. Even if you do win, you probably never really can appreciate it because you're still in that habit, that mental habit of win, loss, get, grab, parse, separate, discriminate, and never having enough. We know that. But I do see myself as Mu-nan because I think Jane and Peter have kind of ended up doing that. They let me carry their things a little further each time. They let me take moments out of my life and repair them. They helped me come along, and they've been pulling me along for how many years is this, Peter? 23 years? 18. You think so? I thought I started in 2003.
Well, that's cool. Well, maybe
No, it would be 20 years then. 20 years. Okay. But one of the things that I think this mantra is also about is just allowing. It's allowing something to happen. It's allowing something to happen when you, without preconception, like Mu-nan kept going. He could stop. It wasn't his intention. He kept walking and he couldn't turn back. He found he couldn't turn back. And I really feel that's where I have come to be now. And I'm in a place of where I'm trying to allow things to happen, just to allow, not to have so many plans, so many other ideas about what is now supposed to be about. So I guess I'm just really kind of at the allowing part, the path to unfold in real time, moment by moment, for transformation and change from a drunk, an abusive drunk gambler, into a renowned spiritual being in Buddhism. I don't know, it's a lot to take on. We'll see how that goes. So, does anyone have any questions about that? Yes, Mike. Are you talking, Mike?
Yeah, now I am.
Is he,
Your
is he
journey
off
your journey sounds familiar,
I,
but I think what it
Mike,
shows.
is your mic off or on? Give me a
My mic is
sign.
on.
Because I can't hear you. Can anyone else hear him? Oh, they can hear. We can't. Let me see. So my mic must be off.
Your mic's on.
Or my speaker must be off. let me turn it on to here. Okay. Could you go ahead and speak now?
Can you hear me now?
Thank you. Good.
All I was going to say was I enjoy your talk because it sounds familiar. And a thought came to my mind is that sometimes you need to go through samsara in order to find the way out. You almost need it to go on that journey to end up on Jane and Peter's doorstep one day and saying, I want to carry your stuff with me. And, it's like you can't look at it negatively in a way. You have to realize that was that was teaching you and pushing you to show up on their doorstep. And I may have misunderstood your talk, but that was the impression I got from it. And I didn't realize you've been there that long.
Yes, I know. There should be a plaque somewhere on the wall here, but thank you. That was very nice. That was very nice. Yes. And it looks like Chris has his hand up.
Chris, your mic.
Everybody, it's a whole
All
thing.
right.
Okay.
I just wanted to say thank you, Mark. Thank you for sharing. That was a good talk. There's a lot of good stuff in there. Yeah. Also, there was a decent amount in there that's very relatable. So, thanks for carrying Jane and Peter's stuff, and thanks for leaving some of their stuff for us to carry too.
Yeah, there's a lot. We have lots of that. Thank you. If we look at Mu-nan, he's a very interesting character because here he is. He's been dissatisfied his whole life. He has a family, a house, children, a wife, and yet he drinks. It's not enough. He drinks, he gambles. It's not enough for him. There's this dissatisfaction. And this dissatisfaction, I think, is what drives all spiritual seekers. I think it does put us onto the road, even though this is something we should work on, right? The dissatisfaction, until the dissatisfaction is actually gone. And yet I think we still need the dissatisfaction just to keep moving forward and to keep practicing, because that it's kind of a double-edged sword. I think if you don't practice because you're not dissatisfied on some level, then you become perhaps inert, perhaps unchangeable. But it does talk about changing. We have to change. We change it and we transform. And it does feel a little fast for him to all of a sudden just see the master sitting there and all of a sudden realize he sees everything completely clearly, or he's profoundly humiliated at that particular time. Usually the stories in Western society are that, as it is with Alcoholics Anonymous, let's say, you have to hit the bottom. I guess that was his bottom. It did feel like a real American bottom is big and dramatic and deep and completely magnificently tortured in some way. And we see that all the time in so many different things. But does anybody have any other things they want to add? Have any of you?
Okay. You look so much taller than me, Mark. I don't understand.
I've been growing, Peter.
Anyway, I just wanted to say that I enjoyed your talk. I wanted to add something that Suzuki Roshi said. He said, he was talking to students that was you. He said something to the effect of, You just want a little more. And that is too much. As long as you want a little more, you will not understand, is what he said.
So you're telling me that I
should
am
be
always
very-
wanting a little more, right?
No, I'm not saying, I'm saying to everybody.
Everybody, but I feel like it's really me because I do that. I've been doing that so much. But lately I've had that lesson, where I go, even before I get to dessert, I go, I've had enough. And I go, what? Wait a second. Always want more. Always want one bite too many. And it's very interesting how that's lessening now the more I practice. And it doesn't feel like I need to have that extra something, that extra bite. I mean, even when I was at Germany, the Zendo, I was always like scrounging around looking for food. It was, they're all vegetarian. It was cold there. And no desserts. Yes, Rachel.
Would you not say that with practice, you can sit because of the joy, not because of dissatisfaction? And that oddly enough, you find yourself being satisfied with less.
I guess it's the way you use the words. It's because we develop habits out of dissatisfaction because they bring us satisfaction. And that, but there is always a time when dissatisfaction creeps into our mental states, because as humans, I don't think we can really sustain this sort of stasis forever. It's, as they say, everything changes, and at some point we have a lot of little voices in us, and sometimes they don't come out for years to tell us they're finally dissatisfied. Yes.
Intermittent is different than primary motivation, though.
Explain.
Yeah, that's a very interesting one.
Well, Peter, I remember you quoting Suzuki Roshi about it's easy to be enlightened. It's a continuous practice that's hard. And Mark, believe me, I understand dissatisfaction. I racked up decades at it. But what I find so startling and glorious about practice is you can want to be, you want to, you don't seek it always because of being grumbly over the state of yourself or the world, but out of, I don't want to say calm, but out of a sense of acceptance and lack of struggle, and a real sense of joy and appreciation. In other words, you're not trying to push anything away. You're just where you are. And my God, for a few minutes, that's just fine. And I don't mean happy. I don't exactly mean happy. I mean that drive to constantly regurgitate more solutions ceases, and it will return. That's why that quote that you said, Peter, I think it was Suzuki Roshi said, enlightenment's easy, but it's continuous practice.
I don't know if you can avoid this dissatisfaction. At least I know with me, I catch myself referring to it in many instances even when I think it's gone. I think it's very deceptive. I feel like I change so much even when I'm in a very good state that the dissatisfaction creeps up out of my subconscious, or it might just be something as simple as, I just got a splinter in a bench or something. I think that's one of the things that are here. I think it's this pain, suffering, dissatisfaction is essential to stay practicing. I think if it gets too easy, it becomes a trifle. I think the practice needs to have some fire in it. And I think encountering this, even as soon as you get rid of one dissatisfaction or problem, something comes up. And sometimes, often, it's just inside you. It suddenly boils out because it was hidden in all those layers of gray matter we have, or in our body someplace. So I don't know if what you're saying would work for me. Maybe that's something that you were experiencing and you could speak from clearer than I can.
Jane.
Oh, I think
Jane.
Jane. Okay, Jane.
One second. Thank you, Mark. That was a very nice talk.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that although his change seems to be quick in the story, it probably wasn't, because a person who gets into a long practice or a long living situation where he is basically ashamed inside causes him to go deep, much deeper, and keep looking at it. And all it takes is one strong catalyst. And in this case, it was the teacher, who not only was an ordinary person teaching, but was a person of high status and was known by the man. So it's a person he would have trusted right away. So that when he heard what he said, he just probably echoed what the man was already feeling inside, and just enough to push him over the top to make him start to take a real change in his life. So I think for all of us, the practice will never get easier. At least from my experience, it only gets more difficult because you take on a wider and wider way of practicing. So you start with your head, cleaning out your thoughts. Then you clean out your body, because there's an awful lot you stored there, and you have to get rid of that or sort that out in some way. And then you take on an even bigger stance of working with your real self, which is everything outside yourself as well, that you have ignored and pretended didn't really exist. And then you take on that, and that never ends. And it's also many of the things you pretended not to know are buried deep, and then you have to bring it all up inside yourself and rework it again. And all you need is the insight that comes from suffering with it, and the push, the catalyst of somebody or some practice or something in your training that suddenly comes to the surface, and you understand, oh yes, I've been taking on this, but I didn't have to do it that way. I could have done it this way instead. So yeah, I think the real truth in this is that it never gets easier. It just gets much more profound and wider.
Yeah, I think what Rachel said is true. It is hard to keep practicing. And
yes,
I do think, as a storyteller myself, I think they just left out a lot of details in the story, what he was going through. In fact, he was the main character when we always thought it was Gudo was the main character in this whole thing, but it was really Mu-nan was it. So I think Chris still has his mechanical hand up there.
Yes, thank you. what you had said a few minutes ago reminded me of a quote from a TV show I really like called The Good Place. And basically, this is said by a non-human being who's in charge of an area of the afterlife. Anyway, so he says, there's something so human about taking something and ruining it a little so you can have more of it. And he's talking about frozen yogurt in that particular context, but I think it applies pretty broadly. But the other thing I wanted to ask that's slightly less silly is, Peter, you had said, I think another Suzuki Roshi quote was, come a little closer. Come a little closer. And I wanted to know how that relates to wanting to have a little bit more and that always being too much.
Because it's the opposite. Because when you come a little closer, you're going in the other direction. You're not getting more. You're actually getting less. Because the closer you become, the more calm you become. But I wanted to say there's a kind of a difference. You know, we were Bob Dylan in a late '70s album said, you know, it had a Christian album, or at least one anyway, in which he was talked about being saved by the blood of the Lamb or something like that, or something. Anyways, he sang a lot of Christians. He made up a lot of Christian songs, but that's just. But for us, you know, it's just the start. So that story that Mark just told is about the start of someone's practice. Then you have to put in the time, and a lot of time. So he changed his course, which is what we all do when we start to sit, or actually we may not change very drastically like that guy did, but slowly, you know, you've made a decision that you have to do this thing in your life that will, because before that you haven't been successful, like no one has been successful, and then you make that choice. But it's just the start. You know, until that point, you haven't started, and now you're a baby, and now you've got to grow up, and it takes that long too.
No, I really like the part of in the story where it's not that he changed and suddenly said, I changed, take me with you. It wasn't, I know exactly what I want to do now. It was like, he did not know what to do. He was completely open. I felt like this recently, completely open and not knowing what's the next thing. And so he just does something simple. He just starts carrying something, but he finds that he can't let go, but he hasn't committed to it yet. It was kind of falling into a commitment that apparently was a commitment not to go back. And it turned into something else completely. I hope that kind of makes sense, but that's really what I like about it. It was not intentional. It was, he was broken. His ego was shattered. There was nothing else to do but to redeem himself. And that redemption carried on through all the way through the many miles to the Zendo, and then becoming a famous monk. And this is his redemption that he obviously practiced. And so sometimes you have to build that up in you. You can't do those kinds of things unless you really, really go down the wrong path and you hit the bottom, and then you begin the change and you change. So it has, I think something, that's what I really related to, because
Okay, sure.
I feel like I did that just recently.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So actually, when you do that change, you're saying my life has just begun, and then you lead your life. Mark, you know this. So this Mu-nan,
Mu-nan.
went off with the teacher.
Mhm.
Mark told me a little earlier the story, a little different, not differently, but he added a little bit at the end. But, so therefore, finally, he himself became a well-known Buddhist teacher.
Yes.
But
yes.
it wasn't when he reached Edo, that he became Buddhist teacher. Edo was, wherever he was, well, the trips from Kyoto to Edo took some 40 or 50 days. And when he got there, then he went to the tent.
I didn't know that part.
Yeah, it was not.
You were there. You knew how that.
We lived. we lived pretty much at one point. We lived on the trail, as it were.
Oh,
But there wasn't any trail, but it was in that area where the trail had been.
well, they did leave a lot of details out of it.
Yeah.
That's what they do with parables and stories
Yeah.
like this and fairy tales. They leave out a lot of the stuff that doesn't really matter.
So
But,
Mark Morris.
Oh, Mark
Oh,
Morris.
hi. Yeah, thank you, Mark, for the story. Do we know what happened to the wife?
I know
Who
that's
kinda
a
started it
little
all?
concern. Well, obviously, she must have fallen in love with the next monk that came by, and they actually decided to all become monks, and they went into the monastery close by.
I think she was happy to get rid of him.
Well,
Let's say
Yeah.
she was divorced without knowing that it happened. But I think without that guy around, she's a lot happier.
well, yes. Well, I mean, if we think
But he hadn't
about it,
helped anyway. She had to support us up already. So, or the family did. Yeah.
and there is a kind of a long line of monks leaving their families to go practice. Look at Buddha.
Yeah.
He left everybody back in the castle.
But actually, he didn't. They all came and joined him.
When?
Oh, right along. Pretty soon.
Later.
Everyone who had been in the castle came along and joined him.
I didn't know that part. I thought I
Yes,
read
yes.
all that.
No, that's his stepmother, because his mother had died in birth.
Mhm.
His
Right.
stepmother became the one that we chant the name of.
Right.
Because she was the person that told him he had to this is right at the beginning, that he had to let women into the practice.
Ah, okay.
So he figured out, he had a son, kind of course, it's always the same thing. The women have to suffer in order to protect the men. So therefore, they added more rules so that the men would not be tempted by the women, rather than vice versa. But anyway, she accepted that part, and she did it. But all the Buddhist, women practitioners begin with her, which was right away.
Oh,
But
he went out in the
his-
wilderness, and I saw he was out there with just a few monks starving out in the woods and things like that.
That's true. They couldn't join him for 6 years.
Oh, okay.
So
There we
that's
go. Okay.
or it all depends
All right.
who's counting
But,
actually.
yeah,
Sukiyoshi used the word 7 recently. I mean, it's 10, not
Uh-huh.
7, 9, but actually
Okay.
that's recently in my head.
He's still there. He's still
He's there every
there.
day for me. Yeah.
Well, there you go. You
Yeah.
not only get, Jade and Peter, but Suzuki Roshi is here whenever you talk to them. So
That's right. The first in the line behind us, just about. Yeah, long line though.
Well, it looks like we've done this subject. So perhaps we should do a service.